All right. I want you to repeat after me. Deep breath. I will not say, is that the bad kind of diabetes? It represents a gross misunderstanding in the two types. Like, there's a good one, there's a bad one. So type 2 diabetes, which we're not, is more or less reversible for like some. And that's debatable. Some say even if you get your blood sugar down, it's still not technically reversed, you know. So some would say, you know, well, I guess it's reversible. Type 2 there's a lot of correlations with lifestyle, with diet, with what you're doing in your life, and then you develop the type 2 diabetes. And then there's all sorts of cures out there, which is annoying even for type 2 diabetics, being told every new holistic cure, let alone for us type 1, which, you know, there's no cure. At least type 2, there's been some who've been cured. Type 1 in general, it's a lifelong illness, you know, with no cures, no published case studies of cures. So, but the thing is, we have, for example, there's a big argument which you could be aware of. You know, there's some people who are super into normalizing your blood sugar. So there's some type 1 diabetics who are like hardcore, and they can be egomaniacs. They can be not exactly nice or friendly. So it can be a little bit contentious when you talk about this stuff. But I'm talking about Dr. Bernstein and the type 1 grit community. Dr. Bernstein, just to give an example, he's in his mid-80s, right? He's still teaching. He got his PhD or his medical degree, like I think when he was in his 50s, right? And he's type 1 diabetic, living a completely normal life, right? So, you know, how is bad pertinent to that? If we're using bad in reference to the idea that it's incurable, sure, you could say, well, it's the incurable one. You know, we could be a little bit more specific. But I don't consider my type 1 diabetes bad. You know, I was teaching English in South Korea when I was diagnosed. I was 23 years old. I came back and I had arranged to get my teaching degree so I could be a history teacher. And I actually went through that. I got a master's degree in teaching. But because the treatment I received was kind of lacking, my blood sugar was going up and down all the time. And when I was in Korea, I had like, this is an experience for a lot of type 1 diabetics, not just myself. I had a 15-minute meeting with my doctor on finding out I was type 1 diabetic. He said, you're going to take insulin, keep your blood sugar above this and below this. And he gave me a diet pamphlet, which was crap, from the American Diabetes Association. And he sent me on my way. A nurse showed me how to use the needles, injecting into an orange. And then I was there. It was like a traumatizing experience. In the bathroom, building up the whatever to inject myself with a needle for the first time. And then on that lacking treatment, where I didn't even have carb counting, for those who know what that is, I couldn't make it through one of my classes while I was teaching English without going low. Like, my blood sugar was just, it was like this. So because of that, I started researching nutrition. What happened later? I got a master's degree in nutrition, opened a practice which was successful, and I've had like what I would consider a great life. I just finished 7 years of doing outreach work after a year and a half of practice, where my #1 feedback was people firing their doctors because they learned more with an hour and a half session with me than they had in the preceding 3 years or whatever. Not to say I'm perfect and I you know, make a good amount of mistakes as well as everybody. But after that, I left my practice. I'd wanted to go to Africa to do a charity project. So alternative health one is called Homeopaths Without Borders, that is active in the AIDS community. One of the projects is in Ghana. So I was like, well, maybe, you know, I'm feeling like, you know, having a driven sort of life, you know, something like the God thing happening to me. But I instead decided to study suffering in the States. So at this point, there's probably 70, 80, 90 communities where I've lived with homeless communities around the country. So for 7 years, that was the focal point of my research. My life was sort of living like a Sufi, traveling and doing this selfless service kind of thing. I stayed at a lot of ashrams and other cool places, and boy, I'm so thankful for the type 1 diabetes, which led me to my nutrition office and this kind of unfolding of a more interesting life. I think back, would I have rather have just been a social studies teacher? And that wouldn't have been enough for me. I just love too much and I care too much. And part of when I was thinking, do I want to be a teacher or a nutritionist, was the level of help that I saw was necessary with my students would take me beyond the classroom every time. It's like I'm seeing so much there with each person, and it broke my heart to not really be able to do the life transforming things that were required because of the limits of the current educational system and curriculum. And I'm philosophizing, going on and on, but I did all that as a type 1 diabetic. And for other type 1 diabetics, I was doing that like a lot of times I had a hard time accessing insulin, so sometimes I'm using R and N over the counter from Walmart because that's all that I would have access to, right? And still getting by, and still, so it's like, what is bad? What is bad? If you have type 2 diabetes, there was a long progression, a decline of metabolic health for whatever reason, leading to that type 2 diabetes. With the type 1 diabetes, it's placed on your lap. You didn't do anything that necessarily caused it, nor did your parents. There's nothing that really could have been done to prevent it. In some ways it's considered genetic, and then there's also environmental factors which seem to be linked. So it's like, I think that having this illness doesn't necessitate the use of the word bad. I don't think that that's fair. So, in some ways, having type 1 diabetes, it's a lot more severe. You're taking the insulin, there's no discussion about it. But I think you can imagine that simplification, which implies the simplification of you have the bad one. And this would be, the bad one, you have the bad one, would also imply, it's like, oh, you must be living a shit life. It's like, you've got this tremendous illness. Boy, you're going to suffer. Damn, wouldn't want to have that. And that defies a lot of our experiences of kind of, living a normal life. So, don't use the term bad diabetes. You can even be blunt and say there is no good or bad diabetes. Like, would I rather have type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes with massive complications and really uncontrolled, unmanaged blood sugar? I think it'd be better to have the type 1 at that point, right? There's obviously a lot of deaths from type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Both of them, even though they're completely separate in their etiology, have the same resultant expression of high amounts of glucose going through your blood. So when there's too much glucose, when there's too much sugar in your blood, it causes all this damage throughout the body, and type 1s and type 2 are equally susceptible for that. So I would encourage type 1s who, feel like they're at a place where they're doing a good, job with themselves. It's not necessarily that they have this massive illness all the time that's going to shut down and destroy their lives. So we want to be sensitive there. So certification learning exercise is, there is no bad type of diabetes. It's how you handle it.